Good evening to all who are joining from India. Good afternoon to all who are joining from Europe. And good morning to all who are joining from US. Welcome to the third Professor Amitava Bose Memorial Lecture. We are honored and extremely privileged to have Professor Abhijit Banerjee amongst us today, who would be delivering the third Professor Amitava Bose Memorial Lecture today. Professor Amitava Bose was a multifaceted personality with Renaissance sensibilities. Born on 28 July 1947, he was schooled at Calcutta Boys School and Doon School, Dehradun. He read economics for his undergraduate degree at Presidency College of University of Calcutta and for his master's in the same subject at Delhi School of Economics of the University of Delhi. At Delhi School, from where he graduated in 1969 as first rank holder, he was taught among others by Jagdish Bhagwati, Sukhmay Chakrabarti, Amartya Sen, and subsequently he joined the University of Rochester for his doctoral research, graduating in 1974. His stay in Rochester was contemporaneous with a stellar bunch of graduate students from India, amongst them Anjan Mukherjee, Satish Jain, Dipankar Das Gupta, Tapan Mitra, Partho Chatterjee, Arup Malik, Alok Ray, among others, all of whom were to go on and make a mark in the world of economics, in academics. They were to become lifelong friends and in some instances academic collaborators, and among them and in their company Amitava shone. Strongly recommended by Professor Amartya Sen, after graduating from Rochester, he joined IIM Calcutta as an assistant professor in 74, becoming professor in 1980. Even though he taught and lectured in many places, including ISI Kolkata, Presidency College, Calcutta University, Cornell, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, he was to spend the rest of his working life at IIM Calcutta, where he became director from June 97 to September 2002. After finishing his term as director, he rejoined the faculty till his retirement. In 1974, when Amitava returned from Rochester, Calcutta, as it was then called, was an exciting hub of research in theoretical economics. Amitava joined an outstanding group led by Ajit Biswas and included among others, Amiyo Bagchi, Sanjeet Bose, Arup Malik, and Dipankar Das Gupta that met regularly to discuss Ricardo and Sraffa in a general equilibrium context. In the early 80s, another group led by Professor Mihir Rakshit and included Amitava Bose, Dipankar Das Gupta, Dipankar Kundu, Pradeep Maiti, Anup Sinha, Somen Sikdar, worked on macroeconomics of developing economies like India, taking forward Kalakian demand constraint models. This led to a famous two-sector models with agriculture being supply constraint and non-agriculture demand constraints. Out of the work of this group emerged a volume called Studies in Macroeconomics of Developing Countries, edited by Professor Mihir Rakshit and published in 1989, which at the time was path-breaking. In this volume, Professor Amitava Bose contributed a paper titled Short Period Equilibrium in a Less Developed Economy, where he both critiqued and took forward the work of V.K.R.V. Rao and Mikhail Kalaki, which remains one of the finest expositions of the dynamics of a two-sector model. Even today, it remains an excellent place to start when one thinks about macroeconomics of developing economies. Professor Bose's penchant for thinking a general equilibrium context, which reflects in this paper, is a legacy of his engagement with the earlier group led by Professor Biswas. If Professor Bose was an accomplished and deep-thinking macroeconomist, his grasp over microeconomics was no less thorough, and he used to teach courses on theory of the firm and general equilibrium theory outside of introductory and advanced macroeconomics. It was because he was so comfortable in macro as well as microeconomics, so thoughtful and catholic as a reader, that he was called by contemporaries an economist's economist, and his opinion widely sought and respected. And it was this clarity and catholicity of thought and understanding that made him an outstanding teacher. For legions of students, being taught by Amitava was both an enlightening and memorable experience, something they cherished long after they left the classrooms and corridors of IIM Calcutta. If Amitava was an economist of first water, he was also an effective leader. His directorship at IIM Calcutta laid the foundation for the expansion and growth that followed, and the change in orientation as India globalized at that point in time from 1997 to 2002. He inspired colleagues to walk the extra mile, defended them when they took initiative, but also held them accountable. But the buck always stopped with him. Both as an economist and as a leader, he was a role model. It is not only as an economist and leader that we remember Amitava. However, he was deeply interested in literature, both Bangla and English, music, cinema, cricket, food, just to name some of his varied interests. He could have an informed conversation about Bertolucci, Bergman, Ray, and Ghatak just as easily and well as he could about Keynes, Minsky, and Walras. He could discuss the technical aspect of Vivian Richards' square cut or the relative strengths of Saurav Ganguly and Sachin Tendulkar. He could go toe-to-toe discussing Kolkata's hundreds of varieties of sandeshes and their relative merits, or where you might get a decent steak in Kolkata. With a huge sense of sartorial elegance, he was equally at home in a traditional dhoti Punjabi, which he occasionally wore to work, as in a suit and tie. With an impish sense of humor, he never wore his erudition on his sleeve. As a result, he always included and rarely excluded. A proud Bengali, he was a true blue cosmopolitan as well. And it was this ability to straddle many worlds which made him so different. We surely do miss him, and for so many different reasons, which is why we are extremely grateful to late Professor Amitava Bose's family, his wife, Mrs. Tapati Bose, who is today amongst us here, his son, Abhishek Bose, and daughter-in-law, Srimanti Bose, for endowing such a generous grant that has made possible the setting up at IIM Calcutta of the Amitava Bose Lab for Economic Analysis and Policy to celebrate his contribution to economics and management education. This event, this lecture today is the third public activity, and we are also grateful for the continued support of the family in helping to bring this race to the fruition. I now invite Professor Anju Seth to welcome Professor Banerjee and introduce him to the audience and say a few words.
Thank you so much, Prashant. As one of the students that was privileged to take classes with Professor Bose, I must enthusiastically commend him for the inspiration that he's given legions of students. It was a wonderful experience to take courses with him and to be exposed to the marvels of economics, which stay with me till today. I also would like to thank his family for their generosity in giving us this endowment to celebrate his memory in a particularly apt fashion. Professor Bose was a true scholar, and the capability that his family has provided for us to invite scholars to join us and share their wisdom with the extended IIM Calcutta family is amazing. So thank you again so much to the Professor Bose's family. It is my privilege and honor to welcome our distinguished speaker, Nobel Laureate Professor Abhijit Banerjee. We're really honored to have him amongst us today and thank him for accepting our invitation to deliver the Amitava Bose Memorial Lecture this afternoon for him. Professor Banerjee is an Indian-born, naturalized American economist who is currently the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at MIT. Professor Banerjee shared the 2019 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences with Esther Duflo and Michael Kramer for their experimental approach to alleviating global poverty. In 2003, Nobel Laureate Professor Banerjee co-founded the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab with Esther Duflo and Senthil Mulainathan, and he remains one of the lab's directors. Banerjee is past president of the Bureau for Research and Economic Analysis of Development, a research associate of the NBER, a CEPR research fellow, an international research fellow of the Kiel Institute, a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Econometric Society. He has been a Guggenheim Fellow, an Alfred P. Sloan Fellow, and a winner of the Infosys Prize. Abhijit is the author of a large number of articles and 4 books, including Poor Economics, which won the Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year, and Good Economics for Hard Times, both co-authored with Esther Duflo. He is the editor of 3 more books and has directed 2 documentary films. Banerjee has served on the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel of eminent persons on the post-2015 development agenda. We thank Professor Banerjee once again for joining us for the Amitava Bose Memorial Lecture. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me give this lecture. Amitava was a part of my life from, I guess, from when he came back from Rochester till fairly, short, few, I guess, maybe a year before he died, when he came, I think, for a lecture, another memorial lecture, the lecture in the memory of my father, who was his teacher at Presidency College. And that's the last time, I think, sadly, I saw him. But he would be one of these people who would come to our house, I think, every few months, spend the evening with my father talking about all kinds of things. And as a 14-year-old, I was struck by the kind of level and variety of that conversation. I also want to take this moment to recognize many people in the audience who were also part of that world, which I cherish and try to hold on to, the world of open-ended intellectual discussions that sort of went from one end of one end of economics to another, to food, to music, to literature, to politics, and back. And that world was something that, for a sort of a teenager with intellectual aspirations, that was an extraordinary world to be a sort of a spectator of. And in that context, I want to recognize several faces I saw in the audience. Professor Anjan Mukherjee, who was I think, student, and Professor Deepankar Dasgupta, who were both students with Amitava at Rochester, Debraj Ray, who was his co-author, and mine, and Ram Prasad Sengupta, Professor Ram Sengupta, who taught me at JNU, and I'm sure I'm missing many others who are also here. It's really sort of a moment, makes me a little sentimental to go back to that moment, but I'm Professor Anup Sinha, who of course is one of the people who I associate with my father and with IIM, and many others. I'm sure I'm missing people because I don't have the whole list of the 521 people in front of me, but thank you all for being here and for being part of that world. It certainly, it inspired me, and I always have cherished that connection that you have all had with my father, including Professor Bose, and the way that made the world of intellectual life seem exciting to me. I want to talk about some work that I've been doing over many, many years. It's about, and I'm going to, sorry, I should have gone in the right order. I'll restart, share screen, and then here is the screen. So this is an attempt to pull together ideas and from over many, many years. I'm not a macroeconomist. I don't really have the competence to join issues with Professor Bose's research, but this I thought might come closer to the things he was interested in than many of the other things I do. So let me start with that. Now what? Okay. So I think that the starting point of all of this is very much this kind of fundamental question, which is a question both at the level of policy, but also a question about, in a sense, about the world. And I think there are two answers to the question of why some people are so poor. One is that they're born that way. They have something that's sort of makes them unable to, either get good jobs or hold on to good jobs or start a business that's profitable, whatever. There is something that maybe we call it talent. They're just lacking that for one reason or another. One could have theories of that, but it's sort of a given that they will stay that way. What that implies, and the reason why that's important for policy, that means that if you can help them, but you have to help them on a sustained basis because they're not actually able to take something and run with it. It's not a matter of, I give you one piece of help today and then you stay on that path forever. That would be in many ways the good news case. These people, if you really believe that this is something that's kind of an attribute of a person, then you think that that's not going to happen. The alternative is very much the view that they're poor because they're poor or that their parents were poor. In other words, it's not because they lack anything, but other than the fact that they started with very little resources, and resources are what makes us able to take advantage of our talents. And if you might have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have any resources, then it's very hard to get out of that. And that's the idea that goes back for many years. In a sense, I think in the sort of the early work in development economics in the 1950s, in fact, a name that isn't here also from that circle of my father's friends is Deepak Mazumdar, who wrote about this in the 1950s. Debraj's paper, of course, is famous, the Dasgupta Ray paper that's mentioned here. And what matters here is very much the fact, this is why it's important, is because if that's the case, then if you gave them the opportunity, they would be able to run with it. In other words, a temporary boost will have long-term consequences. There would be, and now this is what I'm after. So I'm after the idea, a very simple idea, that is to see if there's any evidence that if I give people temporary help, that will have long-term consequences. That's what this talk is after. So I want to try to show you some evidence that is indeed the case, that there is the possibility of a short-term boost having long-term consequences. And what I want to explore with you is both some of the conceptual ideas associated with that, and also some of the data that I can bring to bear on that. So here's a picture. I want to start with, there won't be any other pieces of kind of what economists call theory in this presentation, though it's always going to be in the background. But this idea is important for what I'll show you. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time sort of explaining what I'm trying to say here. So what is here is a picture of, if you think of a transition dynamic, of where on the horizontal axis, the axis that's where the two arrows are drawn, is the amount of capital owned by, let's say, the generation, the current generation, if you like, of a particular dynasty. And on the vertical axis is the amount of capital that will be owned by the next generation. And I'm not telling you, there's all kinds of things that this connection between the two generations, of course, is mediated by many steps. I send my children to school, they get a better education. If they get a better education, they get a better job, they get richer, etc. So there's some story that connects them, but let me think of it as at this level of abstraction. At this level of abstraction, what I'm plotting, that the line that says SF, okay, I won't explain why that's exactly said that, but that line is the relationship between the current generation's endowment of something, their human capital, their capital something, and the next generations. And what is key in this picture is that this curve is concave. It goes up steeply, but then it flattens off. And that has the implication that at the beginning, when you start very close to zero, it's easy for your children to be richer than you. Why? Because you have very little, and even if they get a very ordinary job, they'll maybe do better than you. But as you get a little bit richer, that increase slows down, so that if you are even just moderately poor, not very rich at all, at that point, it's going to be hard for your children to do better than you. And that's going to generate a relationship that is captured in this picture, a concave relationship. And that has the implication that essentially there's only one landing place, one steady state in this model, and that steady state, one stable steady state, and that's where you're going to end up. You're going to always, I'll give you a push, you will drift. Maybe you can get a one-time boost. You will move away from the steady state for a while, but not for long, because basically, what you'll pass on to maybe yourself in a year will be less, and to yourself in 2 years will be even less, and so on. I don't know what's happening. It's the weirdest thing in the world. Somebody's now, what this other picture represents, and I'm baffled by the fact that, maybe I should ask, is somebody drawing on that picture? I see somebody else's pen on it. Okay, I'm completely baffled by this. This is the first time something like this happened to me. This is the other picture. Somebody seems to be scribbling on that in a way that I envy them, but I can't see how it happens. This is the other picture. This is the picture where instead of this, the curve, as you can see, is S-shaped. S-shaped means at the very bottom, people are actually, this generation is, if you start with very little, you get even less. If you start with a little bit more, then you start doing better than the previous generation. And eventually, maybe again, the same forces that we had in the previous picture catch up. But at least at the beginning, there is this part which is convex, which is steep, and which is what generates this other story. The other story is one where if you now think of what this dynamic implies that people who start very close to zero, their next generation actually, that red line represents the line on which K is equal to KT is equal to KT plus 1, and this line is below that. So that, you start with very little, but your children have even less, and you kind of end up at a very, at zero or some place where you really are in distress. But if you start with a little bit more, that is to say on the other side of K star, then, you do a little bit better than your previous self, and so on. And you actually move away from K star towards K double star. What that implies is that there are now two steady states, and two steady states means that there are people who start somewhat more advantaged can actually move far away from those who start a little bit below them. The people who are on the left of K star go to zero, left or right of K star go to K double star. So in the long run, you get lots of people who are a little bit luckier can go a long way further away. And that has the implication that a small boost, or at least a boost enough to get people past K star, will have durable consequences. So that's the implication. This is why these two pictures are different in an important way. And then there is an interesting question of why would this curve look like that rather than that? And there's lots of interesting theory there. For example, there is Dasgupta and Ray had, I think, developed this theory very nicely. And their idea was that this could be driven by nutrition. When you're very poor, you eat so little that you don't have any energy, so you can't make any money, so you stay poor. If you ever give you a little bit more, you have enough energy to go out and work, and once you have that, you could actually make more money than you currently have, and then you diverge from there. This has there's been a long discussion. There's T.N. Srinivasan's argument that this is not, doesn't fit the data. But I think more importantly, and I think this is where I think the really wonderful textbook that Debraj wrote has had an important role. The idea of the poverty trap has refused to go away. So people have told other stories, stories about, for example, credit constraints. When you're very poor, you can't start a business. Nobody gives you enough money. You have to have at least a minimum investment to start making money. If you have a shop, but you have nothing on the shelves, you can't sell anything. So you need both a shop and some money to fill the shelves. And then your shop sells something, and then you can make money and you can sort of accumulate wealth. And so that story has, I think, some compulsion. There's you could tell a different story, which is also an old story, where poor people just feel unwilling to take on high-risk projects. And they feel unwilling to take on high-risk projects because as someone who's very close to starvation, risk is really extremely costly. So you get exposed to one bad outcome, one COVID-19, and your business is shut. And now you have put all your wealth into that. You've even borrowed money for it. You can't repay your loan. You're really at that point desperate. So I think the idea that very poor people are unwilling to take risks is also, I think, a sensible idea. And there is some evidence that when you make people easier for people to take risks, they actually are more, for you. If you guarantee people that bad outcomes will be somehow taken care of, then they're more willing to take risks, and that generates income growth as well. So there's some evidence for this story as well. Finally, there's work of more recent work, which sort of captures the idea of a psychological poverty trap. There is the work of Mullainathan and Shafir. There's also work by Debraj and his co-authors on this question of whether or not just by the fact that you are poor, you are unable to take the right kinds of decisions. So this could be because the Mullainathan and Shafir story is that poverty is stressful. You spend lots of time worrying about how to make ends meet. As a result, poor people don't have the bandwidth. If you want to make a long-term plan which will allow you to go, build a new business and move on from there, that's something that requires bandwidth. It requires the ability to make a plan. It requires the ability to have the time and the patience to build something. And this is difficult, and this is what keeps them poor. So this is a psychological story. It makes people, and I emphasize this. We'll come back to this point. There is I think some evidence that when, for example, you make people sort of more conscious of their status of being poor, they actually take worse decisions, or they can have less time, less ability to focus on the job they're doing. So that there is some experimental evidence on that. The question that so we know that in some sense the mechanisms that have been suggested are plausible. Poor people do have trouble borrowing. That's almost prima facie obvious. Poor people do, as I was saying, are discouraged from taking risks. Poor people do have nutritional deficiencies. And it is also true that they are often, I think there's some evidence that sort of being told that, you are going to be paid, you will have more cash in hand, makes people more productive. There's a nice recent experiment showing that. So I think that all of that suggests that these mechanisms might be in play. And the question is, are they strong enough to generate, these mechanisms strong enough to generate something like a poverty trap? Is it the case that we could actually find that if you give a one-time shock to some people who are otherwise desperately poor, this would actually rescue them, at least for a long time, would have a durable effect on them? That's related to this slide, which says that this is important because because it offers the possibility that a relatively small one-time push can set off a virtuous cycle, that you as a result become richer, and when you become richer, you also become more productive, and when you become more productive, you become richer, and so on. Of course, it's also true that this is important per se. What idea could be more important in the social sciences than even the idea that the poorest of the poor have the energy and ability to be self-sufficient? I think that's, in some sense, it's important for policy, it's important by itself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some evidence from a program we've been following for 10 years now, or more than now. We started in 2007, been following it for 13 years, but data from 10 years after the original intervention. This is a program called Targeting the Hardcore Poor, or Targeting the Ultra Poor. It's a program that BRAC invented. They call it the graduation program. The idea is that you graduate from being the ultra poor to the poor. And it's a package, it's a program with multiple pieces. There's transfers of assets. Some people are asked what assets you would want within a range, and they include cattle, goats, if you wanted to buy some trinkets to hawk from house to house, you could buy the trinkets with it. You get some training and handholding with it. and some temporary cash assistance. I think all of those are parts of this package. This hand-holding is important. Or at least I'll argue later, it might be important. It's a program where piece where you are actually told that you can sort of encouraged that told that even though you have never run a business, even though you have never actually done anything except maybe beg money, you can do it. Everybody can do it. That encouragement requires some time and some patience. So this is a intervention that takes some time. And what we find is that these people, the results are from 7 randomized controlled trials from 7 countries: India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Ghana, Peru, and Guatemala, and Honduras. And these randomized control trials are all of the same intervention, but implemented by different NGOs in these different contexts, very different countries. There's one end that is Ethiopia, which is a very poor country. The other is Peru, which is a kind of upper middle income country. Results are relatively similar in all of these. This is 2 years after the intervention, where we see that consumption goes up in almost all the countries except Honduras. Bangladesh is excluded from this, but is actually, I'll tell you about has very similar results to India. After 3 years after the intervention, we again see that. We also see effects on income then. And then continuing, we follow these people we followed them for 10 years. And at the 10th year, the people who were chosen, as in a randomized control trial, when these people were chosen by lottery to get these assets and this program, those people are 30% richer in 2017 than they were than the control group. So both of them are much richer than they started. I'll show you that in a little bit. But they're also, even compared to the control group, they're much richer 10 years later. And this difference is 30% difference is kind of constant over this period. Though, if anything, between year 3 and 7, the difference actually goes from something like 20% to something like 30%. And there's similar results from Bangladesh. So there is, now why is that? Why do I say that? Why do I emphasize that? I emphasize that because, remember, I was telling you the story of a poverty trap, which is once you get a boost, you make an investment, that gives you some return, that then makes you a little richer. So you would expect in that world to see, at some point you'll see divergence, and then maybe it'll slow down. But at some point you'll see divergence. There's some evidence that there is actually that kind of divergence. I think the data is too small to see and not probably that illuminating. So let me skip that and go to a little bit more of the details of what we find. So one thing that is important to say is that this is happening in a world where actually for all these poor people, these are all in, actually I can tell you, it's in West Bengal. All of these are in West Bengal, in Murshidabad district. For all of these people, things are improving. Through this period, both the treatment group and the control group are getting richer. This reflects, all kinds of good policies and some accidents as well, I'm sure. There is clearly the driving elements in that story are the government programs like the Food Security Act, the Narega, so government programs, but also the growth of the urban economy, much more migration to the urban economy, better jobs in the urban economy. So all of these things are working in this whole population, both the treatment and the control group. What is striking is that the treatment group, despite the fact that the same jobs are available to the treatment group and the control group, the treatment group is better able to take advantage of this growth in the economy. So they are benefiting from the growth in the economy. That was, till at least 2019, the economy was growing and, though maybe slowing after 2014. But I think that growth process is very much reflected in the data I'll show you, but it's also true that the treatment group stays ahead. So that's what this is all background to say. So this is per capita consumption, all in the same year, to 2017. You can see that the per capita consumption of this group of people who are really extremely poor at the beginning of this period, who are, these families were mostly women-headed families where the man in the family was either absent or sick or an alcoholic, and who were mostly subsisting on the kindness of their neighbors. You can see that those people their earnings are improving. The red group goes from 53 to 87 in constant currency, where 50% increase in their more than 50% increase in their well-being. But you can see a bigger increase. The control group, the treatment group, the people who got the assets are always better off, and that gap remains roughly the same. And you can see that that's also happening. This is food security, where you would expect this process to eventually slow down, because as people you can't be more than 100% food secure. And you can see that in income as well. So this is monthly household income, and you can see the same pattern, which is that both are growing, but the treatment group is growing faster. What is interesting, especially to those who are connoisseurs of these kinds of models, but maybe to others as well, is that in the model, I didn't tell you what's happening, but the way we usually think about it is that you get one opportunity, you do one thing different, and then you ride on that. And what I think is interesting is that that's not actually happening. What's happening is slightly different. And what's happening, you don't have to look at the data, but I think it's actually, I'm going to summarize it. Treated incomes are higher at 18 months, but it's mostly coming from livestock income. The big difference, the people who get the assets have livestock, and that makes them better off. By year 3 and 7, you're starting to see diversification into micro businesses. So that they are getting more and more of their extra income, the ones that the people who are in the treated group are getting the extra income from their little businesses. They're not from livestock, but from something else. They're starting other businesses. So with the money, no doubt, that they're making. But by year 7, you start to see another phenomenon, which is that they're diversifying into wage employment. And so they're more and more they're getting their extra income, a lot of them that comes from from migration. And the treated group is migrating for longer, is migrating further away. So they're less likely to migrate to Kolkata or to a local urban center. So they're more likely to be going to Bombay, to Surat, to Cochin, to Delhi, to Noida. So they're really, and that's why they're making more money. They're making more money because they're going further, and they are staying longer. So eventually you see over these 10 years, the things are always better, but they're better for different reasons. And you can see what is happening there is a life cycle process. These women were close to 40, mid-30s when we first met them. They had children who were in their early teens or 10. Now the children are 20. They are much more likely to be working, and the mothers are now more likely to be living on the earnings of their migrant children and less likely to be using their businesses. It will be interesting to go back to them in the context of the pandemic, and when the migrants have to come home, what happens? And this is an important sort of coda, which is that they are still working in each of these segments. They're working more days. They are working more days on productive activities. These are minutes. This is minutes spent on productive activities on the last working day, and they're also working longer than the control group. This is important because there is this allegation that poor people will be, when you give people free assets, they become lazy. This is the opposite. If anything, they're working harder. Now, I told you this is a lot of the what happened. If you want to, as an economist, ask, so was this a good thing to do? Well, that depends on what the alternative would be, but at least the rate of return on this is, you're in a business school after all, of this project, if we just stopped the program at 10 years and said this, after 10 years, there are no benefits of the program, there's about 400% return on the original investment. This is in perpetuity, that would be 1,000%. And that's many other countries also, you get high rates of return. The benefits are across the whole distribution. So it's true that these are the percentiles, and in every percentile you see a gain. The gains are biggest for the people who started, who have the biggest, started with the biggest, but it's not the case that it's only the people who were already advantaged who benefit. I will skip the details because I want to tell you a little bit more about some other evidence. So this is, so what did we learn so far? We learned that most of these people, when they get a one-time boost, it seems to have durable effects on them. That's the good news. And I should say that, of course, when we set up the model, we draw a picture, we pretend that everybody goes to the same, everybody has the same relationship between their current and future outcomes. But of course, that's not true. Some people also, as I was saying, some people differ in their talent, but they also differ in whether they got an endowment or not. So if you think that people who have more talent are going to go further, will go up further, you could imagine many, every family having its own steady state, but nonetheless, there could be multiple steady states again for each family. So some families end up, after they get the boost, they end up at 200, others end up at 1,000. And we seem to be seeing both that process, that everybody gets a boost, they grow, but not necessarily ending up in the same place. As I told you before, the Bangladesh study finds very similar impacts, and they also track the people and say that after 7 years, these people are still, there's the gap between the treatment and control remain. One nice thing about this data is that they have detailed data on the ownership of assets. And so they can plot the relationship that I was kind of hinting at, which is the relationship between what you started with and what you end up for, in this case, 4 years later. That's the same curve. This is really the same curve as I was showing you right at the beginning. Let me remind you for a second, what am I trying to capture here because I'm going to, so that curve, this is the same curve, but now this is not an imaginary world where I'm just plotting it out of, out of my, I imagine that this curve could be this way. This is the actual data that they're plotting. And you can see that indeed the curve seems to have a flat section, a steep section, and a flat section, exactly like the S curve that I was telling you about. One consequence of this, and that's interesting in itself, is that people who start in this picture just to the left of that K hat, which is K 2.34 or something, are going to go left. They're going to become poorer. They're going to concentrate at the bottom. People who start to the right of that point are going to get richer. That means that you should see in the data that the wealth distribution should look more bimodal. The people who start a little bit below to a K hat are going to end up concentrated closer to zero. The ones who start above it are going to move away from that and end up concentrated somewhere else. So you should get a picture like this, and indeed that's what they find. So that's sort of nice that it's around 2.34, around 2. There are relatively few people. There are people much further down and much further up. And that's a very nice illustration of the story they're telling. We have some evidence that also supports this view. This is evidence from a microfinance randomized controlled trial in Hyderabad. We started in 2007. 52 neighborhoods out of 104 were given access to microfinance. Maybe the negative result first, which is that we find no effect of getting access to microfinance on average or median outcomes. And the average family or the median family is no better off when they get access to microfinance. They might have more durables, they might have bought a fridge, but they're not richer, they're not consuming more, they're not, not happier. However, what is still true is that some people who are on the very right tail, what do I mean right tail? Well, if you think of a distribution, that's a distribution, these people, the right tail of the distribution, these people, they are actually, they're much better off. In fact, they're so much better off. So these people in this experiment, the experiment effectively lasted 2 years. After 2 years, if you remember 2010, all microfinance was shut down in Andhra Pradesh. So all of them lost microfinance. So it was, these people really got 2 years extra microfinance. That's essentially, and that's about maybe a total of 20,000 rupees or 24,000 rupees of loans. These are not loans which we had to be repaid, etc. So there was not a huge amount of extra money they got. Nonetheless, the gap between them is of the order of a lakh of rupees in terms of total business assets. And that's striking. Why would that be the case? Why would a small gift make a big difference? Well, again, that story of divergence, of once you get a little bit more, that gets you a little bit more again, and that gets you a little more again, the virtuous cycle. So we actually look at that. We look at, again, we can do this exercise for the treatment group and the control group. And we can look at the relationship between the assets at baseline and their assets 10 years later, the business assets 10 years later. That's the relationship. And you can see, again, it has that flat section and the steep section. What is also, and that's true in treatment and control, as it should be. Even in control, if you start lucky enough, you don't need the microfinance loan. What is also important to emphasize is if you look at that kink, where it starts going up, let's move to the left. That's now, instead of being at 60,000, or it's at 40,000. So that kink comes down. Reason why it comes down is that if you can get a microfinance loan, you don't need to start with that much money. And you see exactly the pattern that you might imagine, that people who start rich enough in both treatment and control to find people who are reasonably rich, but not rich, quite that rich, benefit a lot from getting a loan, and there are others don't really benefit very much at all. And that's, finally, just to finish up, I told you about the ultra poor program and all the pieces in it. Do we need the whole package? I think the jury is out on that. We did one experiment in Ghana where we gave people just the asset without the hand-holding, without the encouragement, and we don't see a durable effect on those people. And finally, what is driving it? Remember, I told you there are many stories. It could be that you just need money to start a business. Maybe it's also important that you get psychological help. And it might be different for the very poorest people who really have a very low opinion of their own capacities. Society has often bruised them in so many ways that they end up thinking that they're unable. So for those people, the people in the ultra poor program, it might be different because they are so poor and they have had so little success in life, they might need the encouragement. We set up an experiment where to understand whether this was because of they can buy more inputs or because there was more psychological help. We set up an experiment where all the inputs were provided and there was no risk. They were to make bags. We had 111,000 bags produced. We started a factory, many factories in Ghana, basically. They produced these bags. We bought the bags from them. There was no risk. We paid them a known price. We see that the people who are getting more benefits, who benefited more from the underlying program, are more productive per hour of work.
Professor?
I don't know why I was muted, but now I'm not anymore. There might be a psychological mechanism at play that this encouragement might be actually playing. The encouragement from not being desperately poor might be playing an important role. That the psychology of this program might be important. So in conclusion, it seems to be possible to durably increase earnings for the poorest of the poor. There's some support, not ironclad proof that poverty traps are real. And this is clearly very important for the design of social policy when if we had to think about how to design social policy, the idea that a big push might actually have long-term consequences is something we need to take into account. And more generally, it's encouraging news that even the poorest of the poor can benefit from interventions. We shouldn't be too obsessed by the fact that if we help people, they'll become permanently dependent on them. I think it's encouraging to see that people are actually able to take their lives in their own hands. Thank you very much. I think I'm just out of time, and I will now turn it back to the Dean of the school.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. We have around 15 minutes time to take some questions. And I would urge you to raise the hand and then we'll select few. Professor Banerjee. Lakshya.
Good evening, sir. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the session, sir. My question was, from my limited knowledge, the poverty indices right now have income as a measure. Do you think that we need more holistic indices, which include, let's say, ecological footprint or any other welfare index as a part of it?
In India, we actually pioneered the measure of measurement of poverty, and one insight from that was that we actually don't use income; we use consumption. This was actually invented in Kolkata. This way of doing things at the Statistical Institute, or actually before the Statistical Institute, in its forebears. So this is in fact we don't use. Now, is consumption enough? No, because you could imagine you consume, but you have to do horrible work to consume, and that makes you sad. So one of the results I should have told you about, but I mentioned it in a flash, is that the people who get these programs are also happier. So you can actually do self-reported happiness. You can do depression indices. Depression is very common, actually, surprisingly common among poor people in India, strikingly so. And it's one thing that we should take more account of. Then there's these other questions of ecological footprints, where I think that's more a question of, GDP. Should we measure GDP, or should we measure some ecologically amended version of GDP? And I think there's a reasonable case that we should use some economically amended version of GDP rather than GDP itself. But that's not so much about poverty as much as about how do we measure income itself? Are we measuring the right thing when we do that?
Upanita? Upanita Burman?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Hello, sir. Upanita here. So, my basic question was, sir, why don't we waive we induce more of farm debt waivers in farming, if you can say it that way?
I think farm debt waivers are the reason why I think they're not an ideal tool is, well, there are two reasons. One is that they then create uncertainty among the bankers. They are very worried about whether they should lend to you or not, because they don't know whether they will be waived and who will bear the consequences of it. And it creates also, when you borrow, you don't know whether you're repaying or not. More importantly, it seems like it tends to help the people who have borrowed a lot and not the people who don't. And that seems odd way to allocate help. It is no reason to favor the people who have borrowed a lot rather than people who haven't. So in that sense, I think that I would prefer something that's more, if you want to help the agricultural sector, I think it's worth thinking about, the people who have more land are able to borrow more. So it's not obvious at all that they are the people who need the most help.
Kritika?
Thank you for that insightful session. What my question was that does the urban-rural divide play a role in the data that you showed for the effect of the boost in treatment groups? Does that incorporate in somehow there? Thank you so much.
Yeah, so that I was saying that maybe I said it too fast. So you can see that at the beginning it has no effect, but over time it starts to become an important part of the story, that the people who in the treatment families are able to send their children further away, which is probably costs more money. And so the children end up not going to Kolkata. I told you this was in Murshidabad. They go away from West Bengal to other cities and spend more time there and make more money. So indeed, the urban-rural divide plays an important role, but an important role that is in particular quite influenced by their being able to take, to go further away. The families are more able to finance their trips, so they're more confident in being able to carry it off. I don't know what's happening, but you can see that the opportunity offered by the urban sector is a key mover in the story, but it's one that it's not equal in terms of people being able to take advantage of it.
Dr. Oja?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, I wish to know, do you have solution for India's problem?
I've always said that I think that I sort of disagree in a sense with the starting point of it. I think India doesn't have one problem. I mean, that's not to say that, I don't know whether it's better to have one big problem or many small problems, but I think everywhere poverty is really many problems. It's some people have problems with education, some people have problems with access to healthcare, some people have access, don't have access to good drinking water, some people don't have access to credit, some people don't have access to just business opportunities. So it's really many problems, and each problem deserves its own thought and its own solution. So I wouldn't try to solve all of them. Now, that said, I would say that having very, very, very poor people who really are unable to survive on their own is probably something we can afford to solve and we should solve. And I think that in Bihar, they have now taken on a program where they're going to do this ultra poor program for several lakh families, so of the poorest families. So that there's really, I think the government has taken this on. So in some sense, I think taking that head on and saying that, look, we would like to get rid of extreme poverty is probably a good thing to do.
Lakshay?
Hi, sir. Thank you for such an insightful session. I find one of your comments really interesting where you said that the microfinance doesn't really have impact on the median and the mean level. So I would like to understand, because if I look at microfinance, it kind of is a cash boost and is also an asset boost. So what it lacks from the other models is primarily the hand-holding effect that you talked about. So do we have any evidence that microfinance along with hand-holding actually works?
It's a super good question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would say that I think let me try to be a bit more specific. I think microfinance is at best a small asset boost because it's expensive. It's 24% a year. The interest rates are something like that. So it's quite expensive. So it's not an asset boost per se. If anything, if you don't manage to use it to build something, then it's just a claim on your income. And most of these people, if anything, what they're doing is they're borrowing based on their labor income and repaying it using that, and using the loan. Most of them don't use the loan to start a business. That's the first order fact, and that's been documented widely. They use the money to buy assets like a refrigerator, a motorcycle, television, repair their home. So this is all. And those are fine things to do. I'm in favor of microfinance as a source of credit. I mean, I borrow money to buy my house. I don't see why somebody else who shouldn't do the same. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's not the same thing to say that microfinance is a loan, therefore I can invest it. Many people don't necessarily want to invest.
So as of
Lakshay, we have many people in line, so I don't want a conversation to start. Isha, please.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I had a very small question. Did we see an emergence of self-help groups once people started growing, once they had access to microfinance, or once they had a few assets so they could sell off their products?
I think it's an excellent question. I don't see it in this context because in this context, these are actually very small fraction of the village. This study was spread across many villages. There was roughly 5 people per village. So it was not over, more than 100 villages or many villages. So it's not the case that this was a dominant fact about the village. So if this was more concentrated, more of them in one place, I would imagine that happening, but this was not the case. So I think that's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to whether that would have happened, but this was not going to happen in a place where just 5 women were affected by the intervention.
Soham?
Yes, Professor, thanks for the opportunity to ask a question. I'm taking it off the academic track that this was on. I'm a Calcutta boy like Professor Banerjee, and I was wondering what the Calcutta you grew up in was like and whether it had an influence on your decisions to go into academic, and if anything you could tell me about it, that would be great.
To be honest, I was telling you, you may not have been right at the beginning, but I think the world I grew up in, which is a world where Professor Bose and there were many extremely influential intellectuals who, because they were students of my father, came to our house. And that world clearly had an influence on my father would talk with great pride about his students, many of them, like Professor Bose, like Professor Mukherjee, like Professor Ray, like Professor Dasgupta, like Professor Sinha, like Professor Sikdar, were all here on Zoom. And I think that was an inspiration for me.
Titir?
Yeah, hi sir. Thank you for the lecture.
Yeah.
I just have this one question. When initially you were talking about this study where the ultra poor were given assets, we saw favorable impacts on many of the indicators in most of the countries. However, we did not see favorable impact in case of Honduras. What do you think is the story going on there?
Yeah, that's interesting. Good question. So we know the story, unfortunately. So one problem we learned along the way is that problem with livestock is that chicken in Honduras everybody got chicken, and chicken, as you know, are subject to bird flu. So all of them died. It was like there was one big epidemic, and all the chicken died. The problem with chicken is the chicken are very vulnerable. Once the bird flu starts spreading, they just all died. Sadly, that was what happened.
Anup Bhatt? Okay, while Anup comes back, Udita?
Hey, hi, I'm here. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself.
Okay. Sir, just wait, Udita.
Yes.
Anup, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. My question is, there's been a lot of talk in political circles, especially Professor Banerjee, about universal income as a potential solution for poverty. What are your views on that?
I think this is quite related, and I think one of the things that these results suggest is we should at least. I think that on one side, I think all these results suggest that the one worry with universal basic income, which people have articulated, is that the poor people will all become lazy if you give them free money. I think that's basically bullshit. I don't believe it for a second. I think poor people are desperate to get along in life, and if they get an opportunity, they'll take it on with both hands. So I don't believe that story. That's one implication of this, is that I think people are willing to take opportunity. On the other side, it raises questions about whether we should think about lump sums or not, and that's sort of what I was telling a little while ago. The government of Bihar has sort of taken on this agenda of giving a lump sum, like some 2 cows to or goats or other things to families. So more like not an income, but one-time asset transfer. So the question is that a better or less good thing? I don't think we know the answer to that question yet. We're doing a study in Kenya, which eventually should give us some idea of that question.
Udita?
Hello, sir. I want to say that it's a great pleasure to have received this lecture by you. I have the same like school and university as you, and so I'm very much inspired. Like you're my role model. So my question is, how much effective is SHG as a rural institution for facilitating microcredit, according to you?
I don't know. I think it's an excellent question. I wish we knew the answer to that question, but I think the question partly is that microfinance itself, as I was saying, doesn't seem to be necessarily very effective in reducing poverty. So then you have to decide what the outcome of interest is, and then is it better if it's delivered by an SHG? So those are all questions. I'm not at all. I don't have a strong view on whether they will or won't be, but I have never seen a very credible evidence either way.
Soumyasri?
So, hello.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Sir, thank you for the wonderful session. My question is, in India, nowadays, the GDP has gone by, down by 24% approx. So at this time, the government should think about increasing the GDP, or should government think about welfare of poor also?
I don't know that those are either or. In fact, I've been saying this since the beginning of the pandemic, that the real reason why GDP went down by so much is that, our economy is already we had a demand problem before, in a sense, the pandemic. And so I think given the demand problem, I think a demand boost would have been the right solution. And this is the solution that economies from Japan to the US all adopted, massive demand boosts. We didn't do that. So I feel that we, in a sense, lost an opportunity. It was in the middle of the pandemic, we could have both given, more money to the poor and generated more demand, which would have helped us the GDP, because I think when demand is a constraint, GDP goes down. So I do think that this is not either or. I actually think that we would have been better off if we had gone much more towards a bigger demand boost.
Professor Partha Gangopadhyay.
Hello, Vijay. It's Partha here.
Hi.
Quickly, from the migration literature, we know that the remittances coming from boys or girls will make a difference to the type of assets a family accumulates. Do you see this kind of gender bias in it?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I could look at it. We have very few girls who migrate. This is in India. India is one country where there is extremely little migration by women. Women labor force participation is one of the more frightening aspects of the Indian economy. It's just so low and so inexplicably, it's falling, it's low. It's not, we don't have, I think we have, I don't know, very, very few women migrating. That's why I don't think I can answer that question. I'll look at the data once more time, but I'm very pessimistic.
Vasant?
Hello, sir. It was an honor having you here. So my question was from my state, which is Tamil Nadu. So we give TVs to everyone who have ration cards, regardless of their economic status. Well, this is like universally giving to everyone. Since you had mentioned transfer of assets to just poor, so do you think targeted transferring of assets is a better way to do, or is it okay if we give it to all? Is the cost benefit?
Well, the cost benefit is kind of obvious, but TVs, TVs are not obviously productive assets. So that's even more of a question. But also, I think the reason why people do universal transfers partly is, of course, political, but partly it's also the case that targeting is often very difficult. We have actually, one of the areas I work on is targeting, and you often have 50% exclusion error. 50% of the people who are supposed to get it don't get it. The targeting processes tend to be complicated and not very effective. So that unfortunately is makes it a kind of a tough trade-off. So I don't think I am a big fan of giving TVs to every family necessarily, but if you had to decide between giving productive assets to all families or not, I suspect that it would just be too expensive to do it. But nonetheless, I think there's an interesting trade-off there, because targeting is also costly.
Rubai Islam?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the honor of letting me ask the question. My question was that, sir, did you see any visible effect in the general financial growth, like increase in income or diversifying of assets in these treatment and control groups? Was there any effect due to social factors like caste discrimination or racial discrimination in these cases?
This is a population where they're all, I think, discriminated, treatment and control. I think that the first order, these were people who were often living at the edge of the village. They were mostly low caste if they were Hindu. So I would say that there was probably all of those, but not necessarily differentially for the treatment and control. I don't have a quantitative answer to the question. Since these were all, the populations in treatment and control were similar, and they were both either low caste or there were a lot of Muslim families, some, I think, few Christian families, and a lot of low caste Hindu families. So so all of them, I think, probably owed part of their disadvantage to social factors. I don't know which ones are most important.
Joydev Bhattacharya? Joydev?
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, my deepest regard to you, sir. I just wanted to know, sir, in order to have a bailout from poverty, how do we actually reckon our hierarchical structure of poverty in the treatment groups?
I don't understand the question.
So the poverty has got its hierarchical structure, no? The poorest of the poor, the layers of poverty. How do we actually discriminate the layers of the poverty in terms of certain priorities in the treatment group?
So I can tell you how this program was organized. We went to each village and we invited a bunch of people, anybody who wanted to come, to participate in a participatory resource mapping. And one of the key questions in that was, who are the poorest people in the village? So these were people who were nominated by the poor people in the village. These were poor villages, so these were mostly poor people, but they said, these people are much poorer than us. And that was the process that was used to identify them.
Samhita?
Good
and I have
evening,
one
sir.
more question afterwards. Yeah. Samhita?
Good evening, sir. Thank you for your lecture. And my question is in the context of your book, Poor Economics, especially the chapter of barefoot hedge fund managers. So you mentioned about how the poor try to insure themselves in terms of diversification. My question is in your intergenerational context, when do the poor actually start thinking about diversifying their portfolios, and does this vary from country to country in your setup?
I don't know either of this. I mean, I would say poor people are very conscious of diversification. I think there is evidence that they over diversify. They always want to have multiple sources of income. Whether that varies across countries, I don't know. And I don't know whether, to what extent. I think that you're asking a very good question, which is, what point do people stop worrying about risk and start taking some risk and maybe not over diversify? And I don't know the answer to that question. It's a very good question. Somebody should study it.
So the last question, Srishti Banerjee.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for your enlightening session. Sir, the question that I have is that, so during your lecture, you mentioned that when like the particular ultra poor income group, like they received the stimulus pack and also the hand-holding regarding how to use the stimulus pack, then next generation were actually working harder to earn like more money. So like why is that? Like, wouldn't they be like inclined to like not work hard and just live off the stimulus pack?
You know, I think that has been an argument that's always been made, and to justify, in a sense, not helping the poor too much. And I don't know that there's any evidence. I have a paper which is called The Myth of the Lazy Welfare Recipient. And we look at a bunch of randomized control trials from all over the world. And we find no evidence that when you give people some extra money, they stop working. Zero evidence, really. So I don't think there is any reason to think that. You could imagine, I mean, on one side, you're right, it may be easier to live off your parents if they have a bit more money. On the other hand, the parents are better able to, you know, give you opportunities, encourage you, they're less just psychologically depressed. So you're able to take opportunities with both hands. I don't know. That's an excellent question, but that's at the heart of this discussion, in a sense.
Okay, sir. One last. You know, Arnab is pestering repeatedly. So Arnab, go ahead, please.
Sir, do you think the India's existing corporate tax rates pertaining to MNCs are optimal in accordance to the distributive purpose?
Sorry, say that again.
Sir, do you think India's existing corporate tax rates pertaining to the MNCs especially are optimal in accordance to the redistributive purpose of the government?
I think in general we are undertaxed. I don't know that it particularly MNCs I think in general our rich are undertaxed. I feel our tax to GDP ratio is too low given the aspirations of the government.
Over to you, Somenda. Unmute.
Hello.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Now it is my pleasant task to give the vote of thanks. First, my thanks to the family of Professor Amitava Bose for making all this possible through their very generous endowment. Then Abhijit. Well, it's a bit of history to this, which I should state. When I first contacted him about this lecture, that was actually pre-Nobel and pre-COVID. And he promptly responded, yes, I will do it. But then these two big shocks came, one strongly positive and one strongly negative. And particularly because of this COVID, everything in our institute for a while went into a tailspin. Everything went haywire. It took us a while to recover from that. Well, in the process of recovery, normalcy returned and we started talking about this lecture once again. So I contacted him again. Well, once again, he replied very promptly that, yes, I'll do it. Very, very promptly. Okay. So then we pursued it. And finally, you see this end product, this very excellent lecture. Well, as he has mentioned, and as many of you know, I was a student of his father, Professor Deepak Banerjee, and I used to visit Sir and Nimoladi in their house. Well, I never really met or talked to Abhijit there in their house, but I saw glimpses of him from time to time. Okay. So that was a very, very, very pleasant experience for me, visiting Professor Banerjee's house and talking about many, many things, including economics. Okay, so I thank Abhijit once again for giving an excellent talk and agreeing to do it despite all these interventions. Okay, thanks again. Well, then I must thank our administrative staff who has stood by our side in all this. Our administration headed by Professor Ranju Seth, and then our Dean External Affairs, Professor Prashant Mishra, and other members of the ABLIP committee who always take a very, very keen interest in the activities of the ABLIP, and we keep on making plans for that. So thanks to all of them and to the staff of Prashant Mishra's office, in particular Mrs. Manoshi Shannal, who has put in a lot of effort along with Prashant and his team of devoted students. So students have also have rendered human service here. So I thank all of these, and we look forward to more such lectures in future, which will be equally successful. And finally, I must thank all the participants who are scattered all across the globe, and I am sure they have enjoyed the lecture immensely. So with that, I conclude.
Thank you.